All right, my name's Joe Lanford. This is the OLM Upstream Weekly Sync meeting for January 30th. Our project follows the Code of Conduct, so be nice. And yeah, let's get started. So let me pull up the agenda and I'll share my screen. Give me just a sec. All right, can you see the agenda?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. So January 30th, looks like we have no new briefs or RFCs to talk about. Although last week it looks like we had a brief about learning about possible updates that since state has still not arrived. I don't know if anyone wants to. That was Mikolai. Is Mikolai here?
No, he's currently moving, so he's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I assume that that's still relevant today. So let me copy that back up here, and so folks still have awareness. We have no discussion topics at the moment. But I saw some chatter about potentially talking about what we have got added in GitHub. Did anybody want to walk through that? And I can too.
I think it's probably worth it for you to walk through it, Joe.
Yep.
I was just going to bring up one thing real quick. Since there weren't any discussion topics, I do have a PR up in Operator Controller for updating resolution variables and stuff. That's a work in progress. So there's still some work that needs to be done, but anybody that's interested in looking at that, I'm happy to get any early reviews on that for anyone who's interested. So that's all.
Yeah, and similarly, I have a PR up for the extension type in Operator Controller as well.
You all want to you all mind linking those just in the discussion topics if anyone wants to go and do a review there?
Yeah.
Yep, I'll do that.
Thanks. All right, any other topics that anyone has sort of ad hoc before we jump into everything here? Okay, not hearing any. So we've had some really good discussions over the last couple of weeks about sort of the direction for OLM v1 and making a few tweaks that we think will make OLM v1 a little bit easier to maintain and align more with how Kubernetes works. And those discussions are still ongoing, but I think we've at least established a lot of the basis for the tweaks we want to make based on what we've already delivered upstream. So in that vein, we've tried to start building a roadmap, and this is definitely still incomplete. We'll still be working on this, as we go, but even this week, I think we're going to start adding a little bit more depth and detail here. But I just wanted to pull this up and sort of discuss this with everyone as a group and make sure that this all makes sense and that it seems like it's the right direction. So essentially, we've added a new iteration 3. You can ignore the dates. These don't really have any meaning right now. But we're trying to figure out how can we build this in a way that's incremental and provides value and still is something that's going to be maintainable. So there's a few main things that we've put here in iteration 3. So one is this extension API. So this essentially entails replacing the cluster extension API with an extension API. It's not a whole lot different other than it's going to be namespace scoped, and we're going to tweak just a little bit to make things support like direct bundle installs, not necessarily initially, but like put space in the API to make it extensible in that direction. And then also, I think if you look at Todd's PR, you'll see that there's some extra fields for like pausing, like having paused as a knob that you can use to, for example, like turn the controller on or off. So we're still exploring that, but in general, the idea here is we want to have namespace scoped APIs which align with where the extensions actually get installed, which makes this possible to support sort of the multi-tenancy use cases without having to have OLM be like super involved in the mechanics of the multi-tenancy use cases. So the sort of the underlying assumption here is that like you'll have different bundles for different components, right? So an API bundle and a controller bundle, for example, you would install the API bundle once, and then you could install any controller bundles that need that API as many times as you want, assuming there's no overlap in the objects that those extensions would own. So that's sort of the underlying basis for this direction. So cluster extension, we had this requirement that you could only install a single package once in the cluster. So that's going away. This will actually move in the direction of supporting multi-tenancy better. And Piotr, I see you raised your hand.
Well, thank you. Of course, there was a trigger word, I guess, for me for obvious reasons. There is a discussion where, well, of course, you know, the concept of separating API bundles and controller bundles is something that, you know, we discuss, and, you know, definitely super happy to see it going. There is a discussion in one of the how to call it, GitHub discussions ticket or something, where I think we are trying to understand how this extension API plays hand in hand with underlying Carvel, and how service accounts are coming into play.
Yep.
With extension API. So I think that it will be extremely helpful for us to understand better. So it's like I guess it's like Carvel, it's going to be like underlying engine, which OLM is going to be used based on what's in extension CR, I guess. But I'm just speculating at this point of time. So
yep. So I can talk a little bit more about that. We've got a separate epic for switching Ruckpack over to Cap Controller. And again, there's not a ton of detail in these, but I can talk about that. And as we start fleshing these out, more detail will show up. But I think we can move over there now, because I think I've pretty much talked this one to death. So yes, so we're planning to essentially switch the bundle deployment API out from operator controller and replace it with the app API from Carvel. Essentially, like what we're trying to do here is just decrease the amount of work that we need to do and decrease the amount of duplication in the community around sort of the commodity process of applying a bundle of stuff to a cluster. So Ruckpack can do it, Cap can do it. Cap actually has a lot more flexibility than what Ruckpack does. And so we've decided that we're going to move in the Carvel direction and start using the app API specifically. And that has a few implications, which we think mostly are all good, but the devil will be in the details when we get to some of the things. But in general, Carvel already sort of is secured by default, right? So you've got to bring a service account. And what we expect to do in the extension API is to ask for a service account, which will then populate in the app when we create it. And then Carvel will use the service account to actually apply the contents of what shows up in the app template. So there's still, I think, a few things that we need to think about in terms of like the user experience for what that service account is and how a user knows what it needs to contain and what the permissions and everything are, but we're still working through that, and I think we have a way forward. We might need to go into the Carvel community and propose a few things to make that experience better. Piotr, did you raise your hand again?
Yes, I did. So if I wanted to learn more about how Carvel is using those service accounts, it's like the idea is to use the vanilla or perhaps after some refinements, KApp controller, right? So if I wanted to know how Carvel depends on those service accounts and how they're going to be used to deploy, you know, bundle of stuff, I would go to KApp controller and educate myself, right?
Yep, and we've done a little bit of that. So specifically for that, we were looking at it, and it essentially creates a token. It has permission to create service account tokens, and then it uses that token to essentially impersonate that service account, or it doesn't impersonate. It uses the token to authenticate as that service account, so that it can perform the actions.
Okay. I just want to educate myself to be kind of dangerous enough on the subsequent discussions. Right? Okay, thanks.
Let's see, what else is there to say here? I think the other, well, I guess the other thing that's sort of related to this epic, but is not really in scope, is that the app template is actually very flexible. And it sort of has this pipeline of sourcing data from a variety of sources that it supports, and then running a set of supported templators. One of them is Carvel's templater called YTT. Another is Helm template. And there may be a few others. And then sort of the last step is like actually applying to the cluster. So what we're also thinking, which is not directly in scope right now, but in the future, is that in the catalog, operator authors may be able to just include the template that they want the operator controller to use when they create the app. For now, though, because we're dealing with OLM v0's registry v1 bundles, we essentially know how to write a YTT template that translates a registry v1 bundle to what CAP needs to actually deploy. And it essentially does the exact same conversion or something very close to it than what that OLM v0 does. So we've been able to recreate that, and that's something that we should be able to do without making any other changes to the CAP controller. So that's pretty good. I think that probably covers this epic's details. Any questions or comments otherwise there? Okay. So supporting watch namespaces, this I think is still something we need to explore more because it has a lot of implications on expectations of users and what OLM can really do. So what we would like to be able to do according to some of the requirements is let an extension have an extension API on the spec that says here's the namespaces I want to watch essentially, and then OLM would know how to use conventions and populate something in the deployments that it creates on behalf of the operator controllers to essentially inject those watch namespaces in a spot that those deployments and workloads know how to use them. There's some other sort of related stuff going on with watch namespaces too, in terms of dependency management, discoverability, that is one of those things that sort of fights a little bit with Kubernetes. And so that's why I'm hedging a little bit. We probably just need to think more about exactly how this works and if there are any other alternatives and that kind of thing. But we know that this is sort of an important thing to solve fairly quickly. So we put it here to think about sort of early on. Any questions or comments on this one? Cool. Extension health. So we already pretty much did this in Ruckpack. We've already got a pretty generic implementation of it. I think Barsha has already submitted a proposal to CAP controller to essentially implement something very similar, if not identical. So I don't know, Varsha, if you, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you have anything else to add to extension health, go for it. I see you unmuted, but I don't hear any audio. Okay, I'll keep moving it. Varsha, if you get something working on your side, just interrupt me and you can
Am
talk
I
about it.
audible?
There you go.
Okay. I think the other sound from the other end is super feeble, but I'll just quickly do an update. I had spoken to Carver folks, and we are trying to explore something super generic for them through a separate controller, trying to monitor the metrics. So either we would go with KApp having the generic health aggregation, or we'll probably implement that in the extension itself to aggregate the health of individual resources which app deploys. But that's up to exploration right now.
Got it. Thanks. So I think regardless, it sounds like the outcome would be that the extension status would have an aggregated health information, much like the RuckPack bundle deployment does now. And that would have eventually bubbled its way up from the RuckPack side. So either way, destination is the same. And then lastly, sort of, I mentioned this earlier, but support for direct bundle installation. And so this is a new feature that has not been implemented yet anywhere on the operator framework side, where essentially there are use cases where it's nice not to have to dereference anything from a catalog. And so we're going to look at what can we put in the extension API that admins can use to reference a bundle directly somehow. And that might be like here's a URL to a registry v1 bundle, or maybe it's here's the YTT template, or here's the app template that I want you to use. I think the scope right now for this epic is specifically tailored to registry v1 bundles, and knowing that we can write a YTT template that converts registry v1 directly to something that app can use. So the end goal here is essentially have an API on the, or have a field on the extension API that lets you specify an image reference that points to a registry v1 bundle, and have that be treated and installed just like a reference to something in the catalog. All right, any questions on that one? Perfect. So that's sort of, and that's sort of the scope, the primary scope of what we're trying to do, sort of first and foremost. There will probably be some other things that get added to this scope, or at least get more fleshed out in the near future. But that's sort of the high level of what we're trying to do, is really just focus on like get the underlying Carvel bits in place, and then also like make sure we have a sane, maintainable, not fighting with Kubernetes, install, update, delete policy experience sort of thing. So all of the features that we have currently in cluster extension around specifying packages and versions and channels, all of that stuff will move forward. So really a lot of this initial work is just trying to do the sort of this one extension can own any object, but not the other way around. And then also getting Carvel in place. After that, so after we sort of have this new basis sort of laid down, the next things that we're going to be looking at are in this iteration 4. And again, like this is not fully populated yet, so we've just gotten started putting this together. But the things that we know come after the current set of epics in iteration 3, those include the migration from v0. So there's a lot of aspects there. How do we, given the new extension APIs and the catalog APIs in OLM v1, what would we do to migrate a cluster that currently is using OLM v0? So there's a whole bunch of stuff there that we need to talk about. We've brainstormed a little bit, but nothing has been set in stone there. So that's something that needs to get covered. Extension parameters. So this is if you're familiar with package install and app in Carvel, then you probably know what this is. But if you're not, then essentially what this is a way for package authors to define a schema for the parameters that they'll accept, which is then exposed in the extension or package install or app APIs for a user who's installing the app to be able to set, right? So this is a nice API for operator authors to provide some flexibility with their bundles, but to put guardrails on it so that it's not just Wild West, and then for admins to be able to twist those knobs. So it's similar in a lot of ways to Helm values. And then we would pass those down into the app that we create so that there's that flexibility. So this is one of the things that we would need to do most likely to support essentially like the relocatability thing that we were talking about before, where you want to install the controller in multiple different places. Well, that might not actually not be related, but this is a way for you to be able to customize what your app looks like when you're templating it, essentially. And then API dependency support, right? So if we do have this notion of API bundles and controller bundles, it would be nice, although it's not strictly necessary, for you to be able, as an operator author, to declare dependencies, right? So you might need to say, this controller requires this API to be present on the cluster for it to run, right? Because it's going to try to reconcile that API. Or this controller requires this other API to be present on the cluster because it wants to use that API. So there's sort of some nuance there that we'll probably need to work through to figure out exactly how to structure the API. But as this issue lays out, what we're initially going to try to support is using the existing olm.gbk.required properties in the catalog and essentially have a way of telling you whether those things are met or not, and then blocking the install if they're not. So there's, I think the other thing that's maybe relevant to talk about here is that the current plan is for us to not do any automatic install or uninstall. So we'll essentially evaluate all of the dependencies of the to be installed application, check to see if all of them are met by what's already existing on the cluster. And if not, then essentially fail and put something on the status that says, here are the dependencies that this thing needs that are not met yet. And that might actually simplify a lot of the development that we have been doing on the dependency resolution side, because it may mean that we no longer need a SAT solver. So more to come on that, but I think we can build something that's just as simple, and we can do a lot of client tooling to make it easy to install an entire dependency tree, right? By having a client that can go look at the catalog and essentially figure out what needs to be installed that way. And maybe that's where a SAT solver would live. Okay, I think that's it in a nutshell. So I know I've blazed through that. Obviously, we'll be talking about this more in the weeks to come. And you know, anybody that has any input or desire to do any development or anything like that, like absolutely speak up, and we'll try to be open and transparent in terms of the progress that we're starting to make in working on these and getting them lined up. Anything else that anyone, questions, comments on any of this?
I
Hey,
had a
Joe.
question.
Sorry.
Go for it, Vashan.
Yeah, this is Yanni. Just a quick question. How does the iteration map to the OpenShift version release? Like, are we planning to have the iteration suite done, and all those would go into the tech preview of the next OpenShift version?
We haven't really aligned any of the upstream work with OpenShift releases. So I don't think I can say what'll happen in the next release. We want to work on, I think what we're trying to do is be like really focused on where are the things that we can develop that add value, Ideally, we'd be able to switch out RuckPack with Cap Controller and put the new extension API in place. I think that's sort of the first things we want to do. And then, we'll see where we are and we can try to get more in after that.
Okay, thank you.
I was just curious, Joe. Iteration 4, it looks like migration from V0 is the top item. And then we talked about dependency resolution after that. Are we talking about, so you did mention that migration from V0 for existing clusters, I'm guessing it's, OpenShift clusters, for example. So are we saying that we'll try and migrate, or should I be looking at this as a migration from V0 prototype or a migration from V0 effort? We'll have steps ready.
Oh, yeah, I think there will be steps. A lot, we haven't designed this yet, to be honest. So it's hard to say exactly what migration is going to entail. In the ideal world, it would be a completely transparent migration and everything would just happen automatically. But who knows if that's possible? Ideally, it's possible, but I think we need to spend some time designing it. Also, these are in no particular order within the iteration. And it's no guarantee that, this epic placeholder is going to fully cover every migration scenario that we need long term, right? So it might just be, at the very first iteration, here's a CLI that can look at your existing cluster and pause the existing OLMV0 objects, translate them to OLMV1 objects, and essentially like do a handoff as a one-shot kind of thing. Like maybe that's what we do. But it also may be that we do something else or that we have other considerations that we need to think through first. One of the other ones that I think is probably going to be something we need to think about fairly quickly is how to treat all of the existing catalog content that all the authors of all the operators have put into catalogs. Most of them are CRDs and controllers in one bundle. And according to what we've been saying in our current design, like that might cause problems from a multi-install sort of thing. So I think we need to think about that aspect of it too. Like how would we have existing operators content migrate? Because I think a lot of this is going to be, we've been saying a lot that it's important that some of the content sort of aligns with the new design, and that has implications on the existing content.
Cool. Thank you. I think the takeaway for me is then iteration 4 is TBD, and also not to see that in any particular order. That's, I think, what I was looking for.
Yep, and these are like iteration 4 is future, right? So this is just sort of, let's talk about the things that we think we need to do and then put them in 2 buckets. And it might be that in another month or 2, we pull some of that in, or we push some of that out even further because we have other things that we realize we want to do first. So I wouldn't look at iteration 4 as anything that's set in stone. It's more of like not stuff that we're going to do immediately.
Cool. Thank you.
So I do have a question generally on roadmaps. Do we have any intention of doing like a higher level roadmap of like, these are the features that are, or things like that? Because like this roadmap is nice for people who are pretty in the weeds on this development, but I don't think that this is a very helpful roadmap for like people just coming into the operator framework or interested in OLMV1 and like looking at this and like being aware of like what is coming down the pipe for the future. And so I would be curious to see if we, could work on maybe a roadmap that's like, sure, what iteration 3 has all this stuff, but like what's the outcome of iteration 3 that we're providing when it's finished? And maybe that's on like a higher level roadmap that, kind of tracks, and we can have this lower level roadmap of like for each thing, this is what each of those higher level things, this is all the stuff we're doing. But I don't know if that makes sense or if we're not really at a point where we can do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Andy and I have been working on a doc that still sort of in draft, but I think it's pretty close, that I think will answer some of those questions from a high level, like here's the README for operator controller sort of thing, which goes into a lot of the details of a lot of the design that we either have done or need to do. So I think that'll answer sort of the tenets and missions. It's not really mission statement, but a lot of the sort of core principles, I guess, of OLMB1, which should be like used to direct how we go and build out the details of the roadmap. So I think that's one answer. The second answer, in terms of like what is going to be the first deliverable, I don't think I would look at it that way. Like we've already made multiple iterative deliverables, and we're gonna make another one as part of iteration 3. And like I said earlier, like it's probably going to be focused around sort of this slight pivot into the multi-tenancy, not totally supporting role, but also like it works sort of thing. So essentially the extension API, the RUCPAC to cap controller switch, and possibly some of this watch namespace stuff seems like the bare minimum for what we would want to be able to do. And then and then sort of the outcome of that goal would be that we have what we think is going to be sort of the final foundation for what we can build everything else on. And part of what we want to do, I think, is like are there 1 or 2 use cases that we can actually like solve from any production users? And I would think that the answer is yes, if we can do that, because it means that certain teams that manage entire clusters, like SRE teams, for example, they can probably use that version of operator controller and OLMB1 in production if they wanted to. So I think that's sort of the type of thing that we need to be thinking about, is like, we don't need to solve every user's problem immediately, but if we can build the foundation and solve at least one user's problem, then that's success. And I think we probably still need to spend at least a little bit of time fine-tuning that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And hopefully I didn't come across as like trying to detract from like what we have accomplished, because I didn't mean to
No.
phrase it in a way
Yeah.
that like we have like this is a new thing, like we haven't delivered anything. But what I'm just trying to approach it from a perspective of like, I have no idea what OLMV1 is. I come and look at this project that says roadmap, and I look at iteration 3, right? And I read add extension API, switch from RUCPAC to cap controller, support watch namespaces. Like, okay, cool. But like, what does that get for me as a user, right? And if that is like the core tenants and like that's our MVP, we've decided to shift our architecture around to where like that's still, you still get the MVP stuff. It's just done a little bit differently. That's cool. But I think that we should have like some kind of higher level roadmap that's like, hey, this is like the initial set of things that is going to be baseline. We're still working on it, and here's all the things that are like changing and all that kind of stuff. But somebody can see like, oh, hey, we're not at that. This is the initial agreed upon stable decision way things are going to operate. So like I should expect some change, and that this is still a very like a highly volatile setup, and then like it's still a moving target, and they're still figuring stuff out. But somebody can track and see like the progress of like an MVP stage or something like that. And then we can maybe have, after like MVP, core tenants, whatever, we can have that setup where we have maybe a feature that we're developing, and that becomes a high level piece, and then we have these individual iterations that break those down into their separate chunks. But
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
This is really just a project development plan. It's not an external facing roadmap to people who have no idea what OLM is. And as Joe mentioned, that what you're asking for, Bryce, is a very good ask, and it's something that should be in the repo and it should be visible to outsiders, so to speak, who aren't familiar with OLM, and that'll be coming. And I would encourage everybody to get involved with putting that together. But this is not meant to be something that's like, I don't know what OLM is. Let me go see what's in here.
Yeah, and so I agree. I think the other thing I would add is I think there's a little bit of a tightrope to walk in terms of like trying to make too many promises where we try to, try to meet them even if we need to be more flexible. But then also, if we do put something like that together, it helps us stay focused if we write a really nice and focused roadmap plan that is more user facing, right? So I think I totally agree. Like we need to write something up, but we need to make sure that we use it as sort of a North Star sort of thing, but also that we don't feel encumbered by it either. But yeah, I think we should spend some time in the next couple of weeks, or sooner even, writing something up that says, here's what we're going to try to do long term, and here's the very first step of what that is and what we'll deliver first. I wouldn't want to go beyond that because you end up, being wrong essentially. All right. Let me go back to our agenda. Thank you guys for adding those discussion topics. I'm not going to do a milestone check-in. I think as we get into the iteration 3 stuff, we can start that stuff back up and hone that a little bit better. Other than that, it looks like we're all done unless anyone else has any other topics to discuss or announcements to make. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.